this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Alan McCrow and I'm Chairman of the committee. The other members of the committee who are present this evening are Richard Somner, who is the Vice Chairman, Jeremy Cottam, Paul Kander, Ross McKinnon, Jeff Mays, Justin Pemberton, Vicky Poole and Clive Taylor. The following officers are also in attendance to advise and support the meeting. Simon Till, his Planning Team Manager, Michael Butler, Principal Planning Officer, Gareth Dowding, Principal Engineer Traffic and Road Safety, Sharon Armour, Legal Services Manager, Benjamin Ryan, Clerk, and Sam Chiverton, who's our Zoom host this evening. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please could I ask everyone present in the chamber to make sure you switch on your microphones when invited to speak directly into them and to switch them off when finished. Can I also ask you to make sure you put your mobile phones to silent and have turned the sound off on your laptops. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, you must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route and please follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is the car park of the Dolphin Pub. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. When voting, only members present in the chamber can vote, and voting will be by show of hands. Do members have any questions about the way this meeting will be conducted before we proceed, please? Okay, thank you. First of all, item 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll move on then to item 2. The minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of May and also on the 9th of May 2024. Do any members have any issues with the minutes for the meeting held on the 8th of May, please?
So proposed.
Jeremy.
So proposed.
Oh, sorry. First of all, do any members have any problems with the minutes? Okay, so Councillor Cottam has recommended approval. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Those in favour of approving the minutes, please show. Thank you. I think that was unanimous.
No.
Sorry, with one abstention, sorry. 2 abstentions because I wasn't present at the meeting. We can move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of May. Do any members have any issues with those minutes, please? Could I have a proposer for those? Councillor Pemberton, thank you. And sorry, Councillor McKinnon has seconded. Thanks. All those in favour, please. I think that was unanimous. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? No? Okay, thank you. Move on then to item 4, and the item is the application 23/02254/FUL, land at the Rancher, Tidmarsh and Sulham. Could I ask Michael Butler to present the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is number, can everyone hear me all right? 23. All right. All right. Sorry. Okay. That's okay. Thank you. Application reference 23/2254 full. And the site is the Ranch and Manor Farm Lane at Tidmarsh. Some of you know that if you went to the site visit and obviously you read the report. Yeah, sorry. The proposal is for the demolition of an existing dwelling, which is called the Rancher, and the erection of 2 detached dwellings on the curtilage site. The applicant is Richard McCarthy, And the reason for the committee is the development control manager called the application in as not as per the presentation there, but as per the committee agenda. And the officer recommendation is to approve the application. This red line site indicates the application site. And hopefully my cursor will show it here. This is the ranch. I don't know if it's coming up on the screen or not. No, it's not. Oh, well, apologies for that. But the red line site is to the south of Manor Farm Lane. It's the rancher, as I mentioned. This is a block plan of the existing. So there's an existing relatively new development immediately to the east of the application site called Manor Farm Mews, which abut the A340. This site is immediately to the west of that development within the curtilage, as you can see, and to the south of built developments in addition. That's another block plan of the site. The hashed area to the left, i.e. to the west, shows the residential curtilage, which was the subject of a certificate of lawful existing use back in 2017, which was approved by the planning authority. So the red line application site does demonstrate that the development involves residential curtilage. That will become apparent and important when I come to the presentation in a few minutes. These are the floor plans of the units. So they're fairly modest dwellings. They're 1.5 story. They're 4-bedroomed. So you can tell these are the proposed elevations, which in terms of the local character of the area, officers considers is well conceived and well designed, and certainly not an overdevelopment of the fairly generous plot. As I say, they're what we would call 1.5 story chalet dwellings. For those of you who are perhaps not familiar with the site and didn't attend the site visit, this is the access into the site. It's along Manor Farm Lane. It's an unadopted highway from the A340. It's just, well, I say just a gravel track. It's fairly narrow. And it's also the definitive route of a public footpath. This is where the access will be derived from. This is a view of the existing house looking towards the east. So as you can see, it's a fairly generous plot. That's the house to be demolished. This is the view of the garden looking west, and you'll see it's very well screened to the west by mature trees, which I hasten to add will be retained on the site should this application be approved. A similar direction, but looking northwest, again, you can see it is a generous plot, even for 2 dwellings. This is a view of the existing house looking east. A view looking towards the north, so that's what we would call the south elevation of the existing dwelling, and you can see the relationship of the Mews development, which is a converted, I think it was converted stable block, now residential, immediately to the east, i.e. the right. You can see the hard standing in the foreground in the report. That is the subject of potential enforcement action. But I would just stress to members that irrespective of that, this application must be treated on its own merits because the red line is outside that enforcement site area. And this is a view of the site looking east again. And that's the end of the show. And I'll just quickly go through the report, Chairman. So as I mentioned, the application is for the demolition of the rancher and the erection of 2 1.5 story 4-bedroom dwellings with an integral garage and parking spaces on the site. The site, for those of you who perhaps don't know, is in the what was called the North Wessex Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty and is now termed the National Designated Landscape of the North Wessex Downs, but it has the same planning protection, if I can put it that way. In terms of legal and procedural matters, that's all set out in the report, and there are no particular implications for the committee to be aware of should you approve this application. I would draw your attention, however, to paragraph 3.5, which relates to sill. If this development does proceed, given there will be a net gain of C3 space, the approximate value of sill will be just under £60,000. Not finally, but next on page 19, in terms of consultation, excuse me, the local parish council do not object in principle to the development, but note that should it be permitted, the various ongoing enforcement issues around the site associated with the applicant should be resolved. Just an officer comment on that. Members can only consider this application on its own individual merits, and you should not take into account any surrounding enforcement issues, because that does not affect this particular site. And if, as it were, you should set that aside from your minds when you determine the application. Gareth Dowding's here, the WBC Highways Officer, to provide further advice, but the Highways Officer has recommended conditional permission to this application and has no concerns about the use of Manor Farm Lane as the vehicular access with the additional dwelling net gain. The scheme also complies with policy P1 and the HSA DPD in terms of parking. The other principal ones, although of course all consultees are important, is ecology. A preliminary ecological assessment has been undertaken, which shows there's no particularly valuable bat roost in the loft of the rancher, and therefore, if it is demolished, suitable mitigation can be put in place. So the ecologist is recommending conditional permission. And finally, last but not least, the tree officer is recommending conditional permission. You'll see that there are a number of valuable trees around the site, excuse me, as I showed on the screen, and these will be protected by condition should the development proceed. In terms of public representations, the council has received 2 contributors, both of which support the application, and the reasons for their support are set out in summary in the report. So in terms of the appraisal, through you, Chairman, the main issues for consideration in this application are: is the scheme acceptable in principle? Impact on the character and nature of the area and, well, North Wessex Downs National Designated Landscape, highways and public rights-of-way issues, and impact on local amenity and ecology and trees. In terms of the principle, although I haven't got a slide to show it, the application site is bisected on a north-south axis by the settlement boundary of Tidmarsh. So the garden area to the west lies outside the settlement boundary. The house itself lies inside the settlement boundary. But because there was that approval for the domestic curtilage, officers consider there's now, if this application is going to be approved, no change of use per se. So in principle, the scheme complies with policy ADPP1 and policy C1 in the HSA DPD. In terms of character and appearance, excuse me, the site is very well screened, as those of you who've seen the site will notice. Apart from the south of the application site, there's built form to the north and east and good tree screening to the west. And therefore, with the introduction of the additional built form, the development will be acceptable, we consider. Just as an aside, I did mention the settlement boundary, and if you turn to page 35 of the agenda, where the hash, just for clarity, where the hash line is under the lawful use, the hash to the right of that hash line is the defined settlement boundary of Tidmarsh. Just go back to the agenda. In terms of highways and public rights of way, there was a photograph, as I said before, of Manor Farm Lane. This is it here. Some initial concerns were raised by the ward member about the suitability of Manor Farm Lane for the additional traffic which would arise from the additional dwelling, plus any difficulties from the demolition construction phase. However, although Manor Farm Lane is an adopted gravel track, the highways officer has no particular concerns over this. And via a condition in the construction management plan, we will ensure that all building materials, vehicles and so on must be parked on the application site. And that should be enforced by condition should the application be implemented. Public rights of way have been consulted on the application, but unfortunately no response has been received. In terms of impact on local amenity, I showed a slide earlier about from a dwelling, to the immediate east of the rancher. There could be a possibility of future overlooking from the new dwellings into those dwellings to the east, and therefore officers are recommending additional conditions about removing permitted development rights for additional windows at the first floor elevation on the eastern elevation. I.e., if any future occupiers wish to do that, they would need to apply for planning permission to do so in order to not prejudice any amenity to the east. In terms of trees and ecology, I mentioned that earlier. There are no overall objections and there are appropriate conditions which can be placed on the permission if granted to mitigate any impacts. And therefore, through you, Chairman, officers are recommending in the planning balance that conditional permission is recommended. There will be a small degree of economic benefit. There will, of course, be one additional dwelling, and it will make more efficient use of what is a brownfield site. Just before I finish, I draw your attention to the update sheet. In fact, there is no update, but I need to draw your attention to it, apart from one small typographical error in condition 5, and therefore officers are recommending conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Gareth Dowling whether highways have any wish to speak at the moment?
I am going to think at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Could I then move on to the agent, Christopher Keane, who I believe wishes to speak? Could you go to the podium, please, and turn the microphone on? You have 5 minutes to speak. Do you want any kind of warning after 4 minutes, or?
No, I won't. Excuse me, sir, ladies and gentlemen. I won't be long. I don't intend to bore you too much tonight.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Really, I've just come along to show an interest, which I do. Obviously, I'm the agent on the scheme, and to say a few words. Thank you. I think Michael Butler's done a great job, so there's not any point in me going over the application twice. The salient points, I would say, we think it's a good design. We would, as we designed it. I think the plan officers agree. Respect to local area and character. Respects the existing trees on site. We've designed it around the trees, so we haven't got to remove any trees. Replace a rather uninteresting building, which has really come to the end of its useful life, and provides 2 very sustainable buildings. The 4-bed houses provide a good mix on the land. As already approved, we've got 2 and 3 bedroom houses close by, which have been built. So we've got 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, which my client, the applicant, rents. I would like to thank the councillors who attended the site. I hope this was useful to see the scheme, and hopefully they see it works well. They also met the applicant, Richard McCarthy, who I hope you could see was a reasonable gentleman. If you've got any other points to raise, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Could you remain just for a few minutes and see if there's any questions, please? Do members have any questions for the agent, please? Councillor Taylor.
Could you say how long, what the duration of the actual build of these two houses is?
I would think about 6 to 8 months.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
I believe the local member, sorry. I believe the local member did indicate he wanted to speak. Is he on Zoom by chance?
Unfortunately, he's not on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to questions for officers. Do any members have any questions, please? Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just two. One, the tree officer is recommending conditional permission with the appropriate conditions. What are those? Because he was concerned about impacting the roots with hardcore.
Yeah, do you want me to answer that?
Please.
No, well, the first, turn to the agenda sheet. The condition which will be relevant is condition 15. The arboricultural method statement of tree protection measures, which was in an arboriculture report submitted with the application, which the tree officer has looked at, and he is happy with the protection of the trees on the site. What he referred to, quite rightly from a tree officer point of view, but actually not from a planning point of view, was, if I can put it that way carefully, was he was worried about the unauthorised works immediately to the south of the site, which I mentioned, which are the subject of potential enforcement action, which could have impacted the tree roots. Now, that is outside the red line of this application site. So officer's advice would be that whilst you shouldn't disregard that advice, it's not advice that's particularly relevant to this application. It's a bit of a fine line, and of course, you may take, as committee, a different view, but as officers, we're advising you that in tree protection terms, in terms of this application, the development itself will not impact on those trees. The unauthorised development has had an impact, but that's not what you're considering tonight. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Simon might like to clarify that if he wants to, but that's my understanding.
Thank you, Chairman. I shall have a little bit of clarification, which is that members, you're being asked to consider the application in front of you, and that is the works within the application site. So any works that may have been undertaken without planning permission, that may require planning permission or may not require planning permission, are immaterial to this planning application and shouldn't form part of your considerations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman, but it has been included in the report. So no, in future, maybe we need to tighten up on that bit, because I had the impression that it meant that there would be some. Okay, I accept that it's not within its boundaries. Talking about the second question is the second question about the boundaries is, if you designate an area of land as garden, does not that indicate that at some future date, it could be then changed to actually a site for a house or an extended area or outbuilding?
Do you want me to answer, Simon? Or? Yeah. Can I just ask you to turn to page, which page is it? 35 of the agenda. Just for clarification on that issue, I hope this will help. So the hatched area at the moment lies outside the defined settlement boundary. So any built form, if this application is approved, will lie within the settlement boundary. But the red line and the overall planning unit, half of it, i.e. the garden area, will lie outside the settlement boundary. Now that is actually quite a common occurrence if you look at some of the council's identified local plan settlement boundaries across the district, we have quite a large number of cases where the settlement boundary specifically bisects an existing residential curtilage. So when I first looked at this application, I was concerned about the issue you raised. But when I saw the planning history and the law for use for the residential curtilage, that was quite clear that in principle, although half of the curtilage lies outside the settlement boundary, it is acceptable, because actually if you grant consent for tonight, there is no change of use of the land because the land is already residential curtilage. Yeah, does that help?
Yes, fine.
Good.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I take that point and possibly phrase it slightly differently? Which is, are there any restrictions to any garden structure in the garden?
At the moment, there are none proposed under conditions, but if you wanted to add a condition to that effect, you could. As the case officer, I didn't, because the site is very well screened from the west and the north, and therefore any additional garden structures within PD rights, which are restricted in the what was the A and B, I consider wouldn't be harmful. But of course, you can take a different view if you wish.
Okay, thank you. I'm particularly mindful of the current trend of garden office buildings and the like over and above a shed or a nice pergola or something like that, which to my mind, takes it into a slightly different. So I think when we come to debate, I might be talking about that as a condition. A few other points, if I might, Chairman. One for Mr. Dowding, sitting behind me, sorry. With regards to site access, I can see that there wouldn't be any particular highways concerned raised, but are we content that site access is sufficiently safe for larger vehicles that would potentially be in there? Is there sufficient turning room on site, etc.?
Thank you, if I may, Mr. Chairman. We are content that the construction method statement, which will have to be produced prior to anything being agreed, will highlight and pick up all of these points and will give us an indication of how they actually propose to service the site with the materials and to remove the materials. And obviously it will be up to the agent and its contractors to come up with a scheme which satisfies us. There will be many options that they could obviously use, but it would be for them to come forward with the best.
Thank you, Mr. Dowling. It's very clear. Thank you very much. And just one other point, Chairman, if I may, for clarification with regards to the potential of overlooking that was raised in the report and the presentation. Is that not, given the state of the current building, is that not something which is an existing potential that Windows would have been overlooking to either existing or the newer build properties that have gone in around?
Yeah, certainly there's an existing level of overlooking from the existing dwelling. But the point I wanted to make through the report, and you don't need to agree, of course, is that you're adding an additional dwelling. So there potentially additional overlooking. That's the reason I thought the condition was reasonable. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering what the reason was for the development control manager calling this in. I did read the report. I couldn't quite pick it up.
Thank you, Chairman. The application was originally called in by the ward member. There was a query regarding the validity in terms of planning reasons for that call-in prior to it being taken to a previous planning committee meeting. Due to the expectation of the application being considered by the committee, which is a public expectation, irrespective of the validity of that previous call-in from the ward member, the development control manager stepped in to bring the application to committee.
Okay, so this is a regularization of the call-in process just to dot the i's and cross the t's. All right, thank you.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, I've got a question on the working hours. And in particular, one of the supporters of the application, I note, although it's not in the report, did request that the start time of the work should be from 8:30 a.m. And I'll be honest, the reason I asked the question about the duration of the build, which could be up to 8 months, and this property is near a number of other dwellings, and I just wondered, is there scope to adjust the conditions around the working hours?
I'll comment on that. Clearly, it's up to the committee what they wish to do on that. It's your choice. But as officers, we would recommend not to do that because it is very clear that in common construction practices, unless there are exceptional reasons, and we don't consider there are exceptional reasons here, the construction industry does start from 7:30 onwards. And if we did put you did put a later working hours, I would be concerned about enforcing that, to be honest, in terms of, I hate to use the word resources, but I will use the word resources, and whether we would be able to enforce such a condition anyway, and whether it would be reasonable, and I don't think it would be reasonable.
Councillor Mays?
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions which both appear on the drawings, well, that were referred to. That's page, where is it, 35 and 36. On 35, the boundary between the rancher and the bungalow appears to be different on the two drawings, the existing one and the proposed one. Has that boundary been officially changed, or is it just a slip of the tongue?
Well picked up. I think that's just a graphical error because I did check the certificate of lawful use, and this is from memory only. The correct one is on to the right. So it is the larger one.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So
and the other question I have on that subject is the existing, I think it's the sewage works that were near the rancher on the northern boundary. Is that going to be completely removed and demolished, or is it going to be used by the new properties? Is that part of the old, I think it was a chicken farm, wasn't it?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, there's no point in me guessing because I don't know. The agent might know, but he can't ask him. So
okay.
I don't know the answer. But well,
so can I ask another question then?
Yeah.
Are the two new houses, are they going to be on mains drainage in that area?
Again, I don't know the answer.
Okay, it's not mentioned in the text.
No, we consulted our SUDS team, and I don't think we've had any.
Well, that's not SUDS, is it? If it's foul drainage.
It's not, but sometimes they do comment on sewerage as well. Actually, sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Somner?
Sorry, there was one other question, Chairman, and it relates to the diagram on page 33. I hadn't quite picked up the extent of the, I'm going to say red line. You and I, Chairman, are both guessing that it's a red line, but I'll say red line because it seems to be the entire length of that lane and then a considerable swing off to the north where it's written Tidmarsh. Can we just explain that one, please?
My colleague Gareth Dowding might be able to help further, but with the red line where you're proposing additional dwellings, the red line must cover an appropriate route to an existing adopted highway. Now, in this case, it's to the A340, but in this case, also an alternative access would be along Manor Farm Lane to the west and then to the north up to, I think it's the unnamed road, Tidmarsh Road, perhaps. So that would be an alternative vehicle access.
So that is in there for access terms rather than the sort of thing that we would expect to see on the deeds of a property, that there's ownership or rights. I mean, just looking at the way that the other dwellings are situated, it looks like this property would own the rights to the access for all of them.
I can't answer the questions there, I'm afraid. Yeah, Sharon may be able to help, but we don't go into that level of detail. We check the notices and that's it.
Yeah, I hadn't picked up on previous, and we've had a few applications go before us that have had quite extensive red lines, but I hadn't picked up on anything that goes to this sort of extent.
So I was just saying to Mr. Butler, the notices would say who owned the various sites, but we don't have them with us, so we're unable to assist.
I think it is the applicants, I'm fairly sure, but I couldn't say 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for applicants? Councillor Mace?
Thank you again, Chairman. On that same subject, the road is unadopted as far as I understand. Will the West Berkshire's disposal of refuse disposal vehicles use that road? Presumably they go to the other houses. Do they normally travel on unadopted roads?
I'm not sure if Gareth's able to help on that one better than myself.
If I can assist with Chair, I believe that the waste service will service properties on unadopted roads if there's an established, already an established refuge collection along that road. What I believe is that any new unadopted roads which are possibly at risk of damage because of our service vehicles accessing the road, they do then reserve the right not to go along those roads. Because this is a well-established road which is serviced by West Berkshire's Refuge, I see no reason why they would not service it.
Thank you. That was my understanding, and certainly seems to be the situation in a couple of such roads near where I live.
Fine, thank you.
Any other questions? Could we then move on and debate? Does anybody wish to speak on the application? Councillor Cotton.
Yeah, I'm taking up upon this extension of the red line up Manor Farm Lane. I can't see why that's there. It may have future consequences unforeseen. Of course, we're never allowed to look at those, are we? But I don't see why we're providing that. If there's an access to the south, which is a much better route than a very ecologically unfriendly route to the north, why are we all of a sudden giving this access all the way up to the north there? I mean, I do find some discomfort with that. Maybe I should put that as a question, but it was just held on there.
Yeah, there would have been, yes. I mean, are there any kind of negative consequences of this, please?
Do you want me to answer that, Chairman? Yeah. In highways and planning terms, I see no negative consequences at all, because in fact, there may be positive consequences. For example, if there was, let's say, an emergency for the access onto the A340, there would be an alternative escape route, if you like, and perhaps if there was a fire or whatever, to the west. So it could actually be a positive benefit. It's just a viable alternative. I don't think, in practical terms, it would be used very often for obvious reasons. But from highways and planning points of view, I see no difficulty with that extended red line at all.
Please, yes.
Members, I'd just like to add a supplementary, which is based on my personal knowledge of Manor Farm Lane and the background to this application. I've been involved at various points for some 10 years with this application site. Manor Farm Lane, as it continues on to the west, is actually a lane that becomes steeper. It becomes less made up surface. there is a gate, a field gate, that imposes an obstacle. Now, I understand that the applicant has right of access across the entirety of Manor Farm Lane, and consequently, that's why it's been included in the application, as I understand it. However, in pragmatic terms, it's quite clear that the main vehicular access to Manor Farm Lane is off the main Tidmarsh Road, and that contextually it's extremely unlikely that the residents of the two proposed new dwellings would be taking a different vehicular route onto the site than the existing residents of the rest of Manor Farm Lane are already doing. I should also add that there is a condition on here for a construction management plan. So if members have concerns regarding vehicle routing, then that preference can be expressed in enacting the construction management plan to ensure that construction vehicles are only entering from Manor Farm Lane at the Tidmarsh Road end rather than the western end of Manor Farm Lane. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman, I've got a bit of a dog with a bone here. Why is that red line there then? Why, I've seen a number of, over the years applications, but this just jars at me and saying, why is it there? Because we're looking at this site on its own, and now we're extending a boundary, it seems, into the A, O, and B, I would say, but I can't remember now what it's called, for no purpose. So why are we leaving ourselves to a hostage of fortune, putting this there? What's the reason? Why are we including it? And is it necessary? And would we be able to say no?
Right. Do you want me to answer that?
Please.
Would you like me to answer that? I'll try not to be too blunt, Councillor Cottam.
Absolutely.
As case officer, I've considered this application, and obviously I'm aware of the red line. If I was at all concerned about that alternative access to the other Tidmarsh Road in terms of practicality or hostages to fortune, as you say, I would have not be recommending the application for approval, or equally would have sought an amended red line. There is, as Simon has said, no need to amend the red line. It is not a hostage to fortune. We can control routing agreements through the CMS from the A340. If future residents of those dwellings wanted to use that access, there is actually no harm caused. If, as you point out, it involved the creation of a new access, that would be an entirely different matter. And as officer for this council for a number of years, I have regularly, on your behalf, refused applications for new residential accesses across open countryside. This is not a case because it is an existing access. And even if it were the case that occupiers were to use that access, we are talking about possibly 4 to 6 vehicle movements a day net gain from one dwelling, which is what we're talking about, which is absolutely minimal in this context. So I'm strongly advising you as officers, there is no difficulty with this extended red line.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
I don't know if it exists, but having it as on the red line doesn't change access rights. The access rights are still there. So it doesn't give any additional access rights. It doesn't give any additional kind of, I don't even think it would change the use, would it, Mr. Butler? It just is on the red line. It's not changing anything. It's not suddenly making that road residential or giving additional rights. So I don't know if that assists you.
That does. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose, given that the conversations we've just been having, this to me is reasonably straightforward, and it's probably made more straightforward by the fact that we've had no objections raised especially by the residents that you would expect to be directly impacted by any development going on. I think for me, I know there's been lots of comment about enforcement, and we can't consider enforcement of existing issues. I do want to stress how important it is to me that enforcement, it takes place on the conditions that have been laid down. Now, I think we've got a good set of conditions. I would like to add to the list that we've got with regards to garden structures, and I'm happy to be guided on the best form of wording for that, because clearly we can't just say, well, you can't put a shed there because that's not acceptable, given that it might be conditioned to a certain size. But I am concerned about the potential for larger structures, office buildings, etc. I also had construction times noted down, as Councillor Taylor raised earlier on, because I had the same thought that 7:30 was quite early for those residents living around and about. But as I've just said, there are no objections, and that's kind of guided me to a point that it's an acceptable position. I think if it was in the extreme when it started, given that you need the CMS anyway, then I would expect people to be raising that concern at that point. But I think, Chairman, given that I'm not siphoning anybody else's contribution, I'm happy to make the proposal with the addition of a condition over garden structures.
Thank you. And also with that minor change to condition 5, I think it is, with the typo.
Yes.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Gander, thank you.
I'll second Paul Gander.
Thank you. Are there any other debating points that people wish to raise? Councillor Mays.
Yeah, on the question of the road again, the access road, is there any agreement on maintenance for that road? Both with the existing owners on the northern boundary or the existing boundary of the rancher?
My understanding is that would be an entirely private matter, as it's an unadopted highway. Gareth might be able to assist further, but that's outside the remit of this application.
Yeah, I understand that because I live on an unadopted road which is maintained by the residents, but we have to maintain the area to the middle of the boundary between adjacent properties. Okay, thank you.
Any other points? Well, we have a proposal. But could I ask that that proposal be read back, please, particularly with the condition that's
Thank you, Chairman. So we have a proposal for accepting the officer's recommendation per the agenda report and the update sheet, with an additional condition that I would suggest seeks to control, to remove permitted development rights for outbuildings, garden structures and extensions to the properties.
Thank you. Could I see all those in favour of that proposal, please? And anybody against? Abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much. So that the proposal has been approved. So conditional approval has been given. Thank you very much. So thank you very much. That concludes the business of the meeting. Can I ask you to remain while the Zoom meeting is live stream is finished, please? Thank you.